So I'm going to start in earnest. Normally what happens at the beginning of our Farmers Weekly Transition webinars is a nice American lady says in my ear that streaming is live. I'm going to be really brave and assume that the streaming is live and that you can actually hear me. And I'm not just talking to my esteemed panelists. I'm talking to a whole load of wonderful people that have logged in tonight. Welcome along to this Farmers Weekly Transition webinar. It's the last transition one of this year, of this particular season. And we are going to be talking about making sense of ELMS, environmental land management, the environmental land management scheme, which has been bandied around for so many years. We've almost become, well, it's just become something that we'll talk about in a minute, that we all talk about, but doesn't actually exist in real terms. But we're going to get onto that. But before we do that, a couple of things. One is there is, and already there are questions flashing up in my attendee questions box, which is brilliant. So please, in your text box, I've got a whole load of questions that came in before this started. In your text box, there is where you can put in your name, and put your questions, and please do that. And if you want to put your name and where you're from, that's nice as well, because it's nice to see where people are dialing in from. And we'll get round to try and answering as many of those questions as we can. And if anything strikes you as we're going through this evening's webinar and you want to ask a question or you want to make a comment, please do. We will put it in there. So introductions are in order. Because I haven't introduced myself, which is incredibly rude. But I'm Hugh Broom, and when I'm not doing this, I normally host the Farmers Weekly podcast. But this evening, I'm chairing this webinar. I'm going to ask our esteemed panel to introduce themselves because it's far more interesting than me talking about them. So without further ado, we shall go to Jonathan Armitage, who's the head of farming at Strutt and Parker. Jonty, tell us about yourself and why you're here.
Because I was asked, Hugh, but very pleased to be asked. Good evening, everybody. Yes, as Hugh says, I'm Jonathan Armitage. I'm the head of farming at Strutt and Parker, which means that I look after a team of farming consultants across England and Scotland, providing technical and business advice to a wide range of farming businesses, from small family farms to larger operations with significant private or institutional investment. And much of that includes helping our clients navigate their way through the changing business environment that they find themselves in right now. So that's why I'm here, Hugh.
Thank you very much. Charles Chandler, you are, you work for catchment sensitive farming. You're manager of catchment sensitive farming. Do you manage all of the catchment sensitive farming project, Charles?
I can't say I manage all of it, Hugh, but good evening. Thank you for the introduction. Yes, my name's Charlie Chandler. Yeah, I work for Natural England Catchment Sensitive Farming. I oversee the technical development of the programme. And for those of you who aren't aware of catchment sensitive farming, we're a government-sponsored advisory service, and we work with farmers in all aspects of the environment, including water quality and air quality. And of course, the ELM schemes, which we'll talk about, are a tool to help implement some of those changes. Outside of Natural England, I have my own farm too. So I manage a farm, and we're in the SFI pilot. So hopefully I can bring a little bit of experience from that too.
Fantastic stuff. Thank you very much. Georgina Wallace joining us from Bedfordshire tonight. You are the head of environmental services at Hutchinson's. Tell us about yourself, Georgina.
Hi, good evening, everybody. So I head up the environmental services team within Hutchinson's. So working alongside our team of 250 odd agronomists across the country, just supporting with providing environmental advice alongside the agronomy offer as part of our services team. So just tying that in, obviously within the SFI and various environmental schemes, there's so much input from a agronomy point of view. So just trying to streamline that and offer it as a broader service. So dialing in from the family farm today in North Bedfordshire with a slightly ropey signal. So hopefully we'll manage to have enough bandwidth to sustain this call.
But nonetheless, you get the award for the best background with some phenomenal family curtains behind you there
Oh, yes.
in the farmhouse. Your mother must be very proud of those.
Yeah.
Cameron Hughes is Senior Land Use Advisor at the CLA. And you join us tonight from London, Cameron.
Yes, that's right. Thanks very much for having me. So as Hughes just said, I'm a Senior Policy Advisor at the CLA, focusing on agricultural transition for the majority of what I tend to do. So a lot of the content we'll cover tonight, hopefully, is what we spend our time talking about at work. We spend a lot of time with the RPA, DEFRA, trying to figure our way through the agricultural transition and the various ELM schemes and others. So looking forward to it. Thank you.
Fantastic stuff. And as I say, if you want to contribute or send questions, please do in the text box. One from Carol Flint, who's got such rubbish bandwidth. She's taken the trouble to text me to say, thanks for welcoming her. But because the bandwidth where she lives is insignificant, she's logging off. There you go. But she's going to listen to the recording. And that leads me on to say that there will be a recording of this. Once we've done it, it'll get packaged up and it'll go out on the podcast channel. Right. So let's start. Let's talk about ELMs. Charlie Chandler, I'm going to come to you and say ELMs. ELMs as a concept, and this does actually confuse quite a lot of people because we've been talking about ELMs, Environmental Land Management Scheme, since Brexit. And I suppose it was the Michael Gove administration at DEFRA that brought it into being. We've talked about ELMs. We talk about ELMs endlessly. Even the national press picks up on ELMs and says, it's all right, the farmers are going to do ELMs. It'll save the planet. ELMs actually doesn't exist, does it, Charlie? It's potentially what might exist after 2027.
Well, yes, it's an umbrella term, in fact, ELMS, and it stands for Environmental Land Management Schemes. So it's not one scheme, but it is a term which encompasses a whole number of schemes which the government is introducing and in some cases has already introduced as its new support mechanisms for farming post-EU exit. And I think to simplify things, it's probably better just to think about some of the schemes which are available through ELMS when we say ELMS. And broadly speaking, what we're talking about is three principal schemes. The first is the Sustainable Farming Incentive, and we've got SFI 23 currently available. The second is Countryside Stewardship. Many of you will already be familiar with Countryside Stewardship. It's been around in various guises for a good 20 years plus. But the existing Countryside Stewardship is being modified by DEFRA. So that's the second part. And then we've got landscape recovery, which sits on top, if you like. And landscape recovery is quite different to all of the other schemes in the sense that these are very bespoke projects. They are projects which don't come off the shelf, if you like. They encourage farms to work together, to work together and galvanise around particular topics or outcomes that they want to deliver. So that's landscape recovery, which is the final element. So that's kind of what we mean by the shorthand of ELMS.
And then presumably on top of that, over time, there's going to be this nature recovery strategy, which is in the process of trying to be rolled out by various, county councils are looking at it. DEFRA's, it's obviously part of DEFRA's 25-year environment plan, which presumably that's going to come in at an even bigger level than the landscape level of ELMS or the landscape level of the land management scheme.
Yeah, so the local nature recovery strategies, I guess, are probably, they describe more the ambition that government has and has set itself within the 25-year environment plan to think about how nature, how biodiversity can be connected across landscapes. And it doesn't sit entirely within schemes. In fact, and it doesn't even sit entirely with farmers either. Although, of course, farmers will play a big role. I suppose the nature recovery strategies, the clue's in the name, they are strategies, and they're very much driven by the local authorities, and they will bring in partners, which includes the farming community, but other stakeholders as well. And that could be anyone you can think of, really, who has a stake in the environment. And locally, they will describe what the ambition is for that local area. And then, of course, it's down to individuals or organisations working together to try and realise that ambition. So I don't know who they sit, that the local nature coverage strategies will sit over and above ELMS. It's probably more that ELMS might be a good tool to deliver them, or come into delivery, if you like. There is some discussion around whether, if, say, for example, your farm falls within a local nature coverage strategy target area, will it get an uplift in one of the ELM schemes, for example, either in terms of your likelihood of success of the application or in terms of payment rates? That is being discussed, but I haven't seen any confirmation of that yet. And my advice really, and it is probably across all of the discussion points today, is probably not to wait. So much of this stuff is in evolution. And I think what we've got to do as a farming community is grab a hold of what's available now. Obviously, I think it helps if collectively we have an ambition for a local area. It certainly helps that if you as a farmer have got a long-term view as to what you want to achieve through these schemes. But I would urge that really that there are schemes available now, and to make use of them and not to wait. And we just have to be sort of prepared for the fact that things are still changing.
A pragmatic approach, prepare for chop and change and adaptation, right. which seamlessly leads us on to our first pre-submitted question, which comes from Fraser Colley, which I'll put to Jonathan Armitage. He is in a basic payment. He's obviously claiming basic payment, and he's into he doesn't say how far in, but he's into a 5-year mid-tier Countryside Stewardship agreement. His question is, which sort of answers a bit what I said, should I register with ELMS? Or I'm assuming what he should do is start to consider SFI. Is that the case, Jonathan?
Yeah, it takes us back to what Charlie was saying just now, really, which is that there isn't anything called ELMS in terms of schemes. But yes, he should be focusing on what additionality he might be able to gain from engaging with some of the other schemes in addition to the scheme he's already got running. And it might be that there are limited opportunities to do things in addition, depending on the scale of the scheme he's got running at the moment. But there are synergies between the two, and there are options within SFI that are not available in the other schemes, if it is possible with his particular scheme to layer one on top of the other.
Yeah, absolutely. I should just point out that obviously when we're talking about SFI and when we're talking about BPS and ELMS, we're talking about English farms because the devolves have different schemes, and depending on which devolved you are in, would determine as to where you are in that evolution. And I can only apologise to anyone from the devolves, but please do throw in some questions if you're in the devolves, and I'm sure Cameron, with his national hat on, will have a shot at answering them as best he can. Georgina, back to this idea of sort of going, you're in stewardship mid-tier, moving into SFI. When you're out and about on farm, are you seeing examples of where people are actually able to sort of are doing both effectively?
Yeah, definitely, Hugh. There is opportunities there for farmers to stack the two together. Caution is needed because not all of the options in Countryside Stewardship will be eligible with the SFI actions. But there are things in there that can be combined to, assist income totals. So even if you are in a scheme at the moment, it's well worth having a little look through to see what could be available to you. There's some higher sort of level options across the whole farm, again, which you're probably already doing. So things like creation of a nutrient management plan, integrated pest management plans. I'm sure we'll come on to all of this, but there's bits in there that can easily be picked up and well worth considering on farm.
Yeah, it helped you with controversial, but it helped to sort of satisfy some of the red tractor tip box and get paid for it. Fantastic. It is yes. For some people, it's quite confusing, isn't it, going through it and being mindful that you're not stepping on the toes of the old agreement. And in some cases, though, Charlie, RPA, Natural England through RPA have been offering people deals where they either stay in their mid-tier, don't they, or they encourage them to move across onto the SFI. I know as my mid-tier was ending the other year, I was bombarded. I mean, it was a veritable love-in from the RPA, wanting me to just extend it for another year. And as it was, we've stood back for a year to watch the dust settle. But a lot of people were offered that, or have been, and presumably they're still being offered that.
Yeah, absolutely. And to use another cliche, it is going to come down to the individual farm circumstance, of course. But yeah, I mean, there are a few sort of elements here to pick up on. First and foremost, I think, you can have an existing agreement and lay other agreements on top of that. As Georgina's just said, so if you're in a Countryside Stewardship mid-tier, for example, you could have an SFI agreement running alongside it. But there's a golden rule of thumb is that you're not getting paid for the same thing twice. So that's the thing to be really careful of. And by and large, if say for example you look to apply for SFI, the system has been designed such that it will pick up on any ineligible areas, if you like. So if an area is already taken up by Countryside Stewardship option, for example, or a field is under agreement, then that field will be flagged as not being available for that particular SFI action. But Hugh, in terms of how you might approach, if you're in an existing agreement, I think the thought process should be, first and foremost, am I happy with what I've got? Because if you are happy with it, there's a lot to be said by sticking with it. Yes, there are elements you could possibly build on top, but if it's working well, then think carefully about before changing, essentially. If you are in agreement and you wanted to exit that agreement altogether, then of course it's always important to go back to the terms of that agreement. But if you were in that situation, then I would recommend that you wrote directly to the RPA so you could fully understand what the implications are for you on your farm. The government wants there to be some flexibility. It's always wanted, ever since we've begun to move on to these newer schemes, there's always been that sort of implicit desire to allow people to change as and when the time is right for them. But as I say, that's where you need to probably contact the RPA to understand exactly what that means for you. But do still remember, you can probably look at these schemes as a bit of a jigsaw puzzle in many ways. And that, I know that sounds complicated, but in some ways, if you're thinking about filling the gaps in the puzzle, there could be different schemes filling different gaps, and so that's where you could have different schemes running along together at once.
I think the big thing is there are there is so much. Well, there are a lot of different things now on offer, aren't there? Whether we're talking about environmental land management, grants for slurry, infrastructure, so on and so forth. It's difficult to herd the cats and actually see them in the round. Cameron, is that something you're finding with your members? Are your members managing to hybridize new schemes with old, or are they moving forward? Are they generally telling you it's going in the right direction?
I think they're on board with the general thrust of the direction, but you're right in that, keeping on track of schemes it is a full-time job in my case, particularly when there are different application windows opening and closing throughout the year. You mentioned Slurry Infrastructure Grant, which is one amongst many. We had the DEFRA Secretary of State announce a whole new slew last week at our conference, and so it is a challenge to keep on track. And I guess we've all got a job to do in terms of communicating the opportunities that are out there to our respective organisations. But there is quite a lot to sift through, and I don't think there's any getting away from the fact that you need to invest quite a lot of time in figuring out what the right scheme might be for you, because there's no point, chasing after, animal health and welfare pathway if you don't have or don't plan on keeping livestock. So, I think that's a reality of a more complex option of payment choices, basically.
Yeah, at some point, I Janet Hughes, who leads the DEFRA team that are delivering this set of schemes, and I've been to a couple of presentations, and I think Janet's ultimate dream is that there's this dashboard that you go onto, and it tells you everything that you can potentially apply for on your farm. At the moment, you're effectively having to gather all those bits in manually to see what you could potentially apply for on your farm where the pin is in the map. There's a question just coming on the chat from Carol Johnson, which is relevant because it's approached to uplands, and the uplands, a lot of the criticism of the scheme so far is the uplands have been a bit left out. There was a report out the other week which said uplands could be back sort of 35% in terms of revenue. She says it's basically early exit of Countryside Stewardship, the end of the moorland standards, and then new SFI standards coming in. I think what she's worried about is, again, it's this transition, Charlie. How should she transition that? Because she risks falling into a big gap of no money coming in.
Absolutely, and I think the uplands is a particular sort of case, really, isn't it? First thing to say is that that we are expecting a whole range of extra actions through SFI designed specifically for uplands soon. I haven't got a date on that yet, but I think DEFRA are looking to announce that early, I would say, in the new year. That's what we expect anyway. And a lot of thought has gone into upland farms. That there is an action available in SFI currently. That's essentially to assess upland areas and look at their potential for future management. That's kind of what it is. In addition, there's no distinction now between the payment rate for, say, a low input grassland in the lowland as a low input grassland in the upland. There used to be a huge difference in the payment now. That isn't the case. They have parity, which is a good thing. But in terms of specific actions for upland, then we are expecting those in due course.
Yeah, the rumor is you might be very early in the new year. Might be, you never know. Someone might stand up at the Oxford Farming Conference and say what it is. But,
maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Let's go to a specific question here, which is from Paul Davis. As a grazing dairy farmers, we could utilise SAM3. SAM3 is one of the SFI options. It's the option for herbal lays or multi-species lays. And Paul asks, what level of establishment is needed to qualify for payments? Georgina, what do you tell your clients in terms of, presumably you've just got to get the thing established and show that I think there's a minimum of 5 or 6 different species that have to be in that lay?
Yeah, that's correct. So SAM3 is a very similar option to the herbal lays that we've had in Countryside Stewardship. I think the message with the SFI is that actually the scheme is considerably more flexible. So rather than there being really specific requirements for some of the options, it's actually really quite flexible. And as long as you can evidence when inspected that you've delivered the aims of the options or actions, then actually how you go about doing that is fairly open. So in terms of SAM3 herbal lays, it needs to include a mix of legumes, herbs and grasses. Obviously, being plural, that means more than one of each. There are sort of recommended seed rates and species that should be included, and you'll find multiple different seed companies offer a variety of mixes, and that will be regional as well. And there's nothing to say there as well, Hugh, that existing swards can't be used. So if a farmer already had that mix on the farm and obviously it wasn't being utilised in another scheme, there's no reason why that can't be picked up within the SFI.
That's good. And Jonathan Armitage, is SAM3 something that your grazing clients and land that you manage that you guys have been looking at closely and as a way of optimising grazing and getting cash from the government effectively?
Yeah, I think they're all looking at it. I think there has been this sense that there's more in it for the arable in SFI, there's more in it for the arable farmers than there is for the grassland farmers. So this is one of those options that is being, well, it's the most popular discussion point, how many applications end up being made. But I think you also have to consider that quite a lot of these farms are quite intensive producers and intensive users of land. And so they do need to be quite careful about changes that they make to their grazing and stocking policies. And I've seen a number of clients who've looked at it and sort of turned away from it because of this intensive land management and the opportunity to become slightly more extensive and so on. one thing I would pick up on, which is something that Georgina just said, which is about being more flexible. In the original part of this question was about what do I actually need to do to achieve this, and we've seen the flexibility has positive and negative implications, in the sense that whilst most of the options within SFI have description of the actions that you're supposed to take, say things like, we don't we don't care. We don't mind how you go about achieving this, provided you achieve what might reasonably be expected, or those sorts of words. So winter bird food is another example. How long am I supposed to leave it there? Well, you're supposed to leave it there for the winter months, or to achieve the expected outcomes. And that leaves people wondering whether or not they've achieved the expected outcomes. Now, this comes as a consequence of farmers having complained quite a lot about some of the very strict guidelines that they've been given in the past about what they should and shouldn't do. And so government have said, oh, okay, that's fine. We'll leave it up to you to decide what you provided you achieve this outcome. And now, of course, there's a slight challenge as to whether people have achieved it or not. And I think that goes hand in hand with the new inspection regime, which is when people come and inspect my farm, what will they expect to see, and so on, and how will I know whether I've achieved the aims or not? And of course, we've all been hammered by very heavy authoritarian penalties in the past for schemes for some very minor infringements. So I think people are quite nervous about this potential new.
It's a new way forward. Well, it is. It's interesting. And you're right. Look, those penalties were put there because it was part of the EU audit process. And to justify, the billions that was spent on the Common Agricultural Policy, it had to be down to minutiae. Now it's effectively UK government PLC running it. They're, as you say, they're scarily a bit more chilled out about it. But I mean, ostensibly, Charlie, though, when we talk about what cover do you need, there are prescriptions for each of these options, aren't there? And if you're going to plant wild bird or go down the route of a herbal lay, then that's presumably what you're expected to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think the best way to look at it is that there is some do's and don'ts outlined. That it is very much put over to the agreement holder to manage those actions to the outcomes. So it is put in the hands of the agreement holder to do that. And I think what we need to come back to is trying to understand exactly what you want to get out of that action. And I come back to the name of the sustainable farming incentive itself. The clue is in the name, if you like. It is there to encourage sustainable farming practices that hopefully will be of benefit to that farm, and therefore it's in the agreements holder interest to manage those actions well, if you like. That's all easier said than done, but that's kind of the overall approach that's being taken. And I think that also goes for the SAM3 herbal lay action. It is designed, if you like, to look at whether farms and potentially dairy farms can look at incorporating leguminous plants into swards to help reduce their reliance on manufactured nitrogen, for example. There may be associated benefits to stock health. There may be benefits to the resilience of that sward because you've got different plants growing. So there are benefits, and we have done some trial work with dairy farms who have looked at how you can utilise herbal lay type mixes in a productive dairy system, but it requires a lot of thinking. And I think that's another sort of word of advice, I think, really, with SFI. A lot of the actions do look quite good in terms of payment rates, but you do need to think about how they're going to fit into your farming system. That's not to say you shouldn't bring them into your farming system, but you do need to plan them in quite carefully. And quite often it'll be a case of trialing some of these actions first. So try some herbal lays. Don't put the whole farm down. Try them and see, learn, see how they manage best on your farm and your farm system, and then go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing with that we're doing SAM3s here, and the thing for me actually is if I can graze more cattle on smaller piece of land, which some of my grazing colleagues are managing to do. The other big one to look at is look at the carbon, because the carbon intake into the soil on some of those herbal layers, if you really get them cooking, particularly if you're going into some fairly hard worked arable soils, there's some real potential there as well. There's a question just come in while we were talking about that from Sam Barcroft from Pennymore Farm. He wants I assume that's a he Sam, or it could be a she, it could be a they Sam, who knows. Anyway, Sam wants to know, can you claim Sam 3 on existing grassland in an upland setting? Cameron Hughes, can you claim Sam 3 on existing grassland in an upland setting?
Good question. I'm frantically scrambling through the handbook to find a quick answer, which I recommend.
Well, you have to go. So I'm right thinking Sam 3 is effectively can go onto any grassland or arable on the grassland basis. Am I right in saying, Charlie, as long as it's improved grassland, correct?
Yeah, it is very much designed for improved grassland. And if in doubt, I would urge caution, because if it isn't improved grassland, then you may need to, or you will need to be considering environmental impact assessment regulations, which obviously is a big consideration. So yes, I think you need to look at those as improved grassland. There's a definition of improved grassland. Sorry, my light's just gone off. A definition of improved grassland, I think, in the handbook. And of course, if you are working in an unimproved grassland setting, then hopefully there will be more actions for those in SFI in the new year. And of course, we are expecting, and that applies to both lowland and uplands. And hopefully, of course, we will also have a refreshed countryside stewardship where some of these I guess the intention is that some of the higher quality type habitats would fall under countryside stewardship.
Jonathan, what's definition of improved grassland? Am I right in thinking it's where you've used fertilizers or sprays within, is it a 10-year period?
Yeah, within a 15-year period. If you've been regularly doing it over a 15-year period, whether you've been reseeding or fertilizing and or blanket spraying rather than spot spraying, those sorts of things will define improved grassland.
Yeah, so it comes in as that. And then the other thing, Georgina, which is a challenge on some of these SFI applications, is making sure that your land cover code is correct. So when you go onto SFIs, I have found out, and the field is arable. It's been arable for Lord knows how long, and the computer says no, and it doesn't like it. It won't let you click it in the box and save it. Why is that? Let's talk about land covers, because this is quite confusing for a lot of people, isn't it?
Yeah, it's been causing a lot of problems. I mean, this is a hangover really from the countryside stewardship system. We saw this frequently last year with countryside stewardship applications, and it continues through till the SFI as well. So yeah, it's really important before you actually even begin to start an SFI application, just to check through and double check and make sure your land covers are correct in the RPA portal. Doing that at the start just saves such a headache down the line, because you get the dreaded red arrows and red warning signs pop up, and once you get those, you can't progress your application any further. So a lot of the problems occur when the land uses don't match, or there's a slight area difference between a BPS claim and what's registered in the land portal on the RPA website. And if you can just alleviate those problems before you start, it just streamlines the process. The RPA has put together some pretty useful guidance. Actually, there's a video on YouTube that I frequently send to customers to have a first stab to see if they can amend the problem. There is also a section of guidance in the how to apply SFI manual as well, which is a step-by-step how to fix those land use issues. if you get totally stuck, the RPA can assist you, but it's a slower process. So if you can sort those out before you start, that really is key. And obviously as well, the manual itself does outline which options and actions can be used and where. So just make sure that what you're trying to apply for is actually eligible for that land use that you're trying to use as well.
Yes, effectively make sure your land use codes and everything's set up right before you dive in and start adding or trying to add things onto it. I hope, Sam, that's answered your question. So in theory, if it's improved grassland, then you can put it into SAM3, assuming you've got the right cover code in on your system, on your land system, before you jump onto the SFI bit, which is an interesting thing. Another interesting question come from Simon Barrand on the he's from Handelsbanken. He's one of their corporate managers. If you put down a herbal lay, does this affect what you can cut for silage? Well, you can cut herbal lays if you've got the right herbal lays, can't you, Charlie?
Absolutely, yes, you can. Yeah, you can. That's perfectly within the realms of the action.
That's allowed.
So,
just don't put loads of chicory in it, because if you try silaging chicory, you might never do it again, and it might put you off it for life. So just lay low on the chicory if you're going to try silaging some stuff. So yes, it's an interesting thing. I think yes, the SFI things. There's lots of things here which are quite new to some people, and I suppose in some cases, it's a tricky time just trying to work out what's what. Jane Green sends a question in. Cameron, I'm going to come to you with this. Does having horses on part of the land, she says, exclude us from joining the scheme? What is the interplay between horses and BPS/SFI?
There's no prohibition on horses or other kinds of grazing.
Some people might say that's a shame, but anyway, carry on.
It is. Well, I guess typically the majority of the schemes aren't necessarily aimed at those sort of keeping your sort of thoroughbreds that you might see at Ascot or something. But I guess if you're looking at more kind of conservation-based breeds like your Exmoor ponies or whatever, they might be more likely to deliver the kind of ecological outcomes that DEFRA are paying you to deliver. So, I guess it's a case of looking at which options you might want to deploy and whether or not the whichever grazing options that you might have at your disposal with the right kind of ecosystem engineers, if you like, to deliver the outcomes.
Yeah, so no great ban with it. Roger Douglas asked a question. He's a non-farmer. He's a landowner. It sounds like he's got someone on his land with a grazing license. And historically, interestingly, he says that the grazier has claimed the single farm payment. Jonathan, he's saying is the ways that he can benefit more from the payment as the landowner. But this is how do you see this in terms of, because effectively this is down to, because we had entitlements with BPS, didn't we, which was possibly why Roger hasn't been able to claim the BPS on his land, because he didn't add the entitlements but the grazier did. Now moving into the brave new SFI world, presumably if Roger wants to, he could claim all the money for chuck it all into SAM3, and he could just come in and pay him to graze it with his sheep, could he?
I think there's a couple of things here to answer this question. One is Roger's eligibility for the scheme generally. So to be eligible for SFI, he needs to have been an eligible BPS applicant in 2022 or 2023. That's key, and that means that he must have had at least 5 hectares and have had at least 5 entitlements. And that eligibility criteria, I think, is likely to change as we go forwards, as new entrants come into farming and they didn't make a claim in 2023. We can't keep these things set in stone for a long period of time, but at the moment, it's only available to those people. So Roger might have a stumbling block right at the first hurdle. The second point of the question is about who is occupying this land and who's managing it and who's responsible for it and who can claim the actions. It's been made slightly clearer actually in SFI than it might have been in the past. So in the past we've had the possibility that one applicant can make a BPS claim and somebody else can make a Countryside Stewardship claim on the same piece of land. Nobody liked it very much because it was complicated, but it was possible. Now they're saying that you need to establish that you have 3 years of management control of the land, and the expectation is that as a licensee, you are unlikely to have that degree of management control. So it's more likely to be the landowner that is eligible for the scheme under those circumstances. And with a tenancy, they've made it pretty clear that only the tenant can make an application for SFI where there's a proper tenancy in place.
Yeah, so it does. It goes. I mean, Georgina, this is potentially if you look at this, taking this question and looking at from the grazier point of view, again, this is another. It's hard if you're a grazier, if you're going around and you have a large number of sheep and you go around a large area of land in a particular part of the country, there's not really a lot for you to claim, is there? Rather than a bit of, in the case of a sheep farmer, bit of animal health and welfare pathway, 500 quid vet visit. That's about all you could do, isn't it?
It is a bit limited. I mean, we're hoping that in the future things could change and there will be more opportunities there. But it is frustrating. I think each case is not wanting to give a really generic answer, but each case is slightly different. And I think this is where, having a good land agent in place to be able to assist you with these conversations is really important, because actually there might be a way to come up with a mutual agreement between grazier and landowner where you're able to come up with a solution so that there is an opportunity to receive some funding between the two of you, obviously agreed within the terms of the grazing license, so that that's all clear and set out and everybody knows what they're committed and signed up to deliver. I think that's really important. Everybody needs it within the discussion needs to understand what the commitments are and who's liable at the end of the day, because we've seen it happen before, and I'm sure others on the call have too. And unfortunately, sometimes you're better off not getting into that situation in the first place. But if you do, it's really essential to make sure everybody understands the do's and don'ts and whens and what they can and can't do.
Yeah, a good contract is required. This sort of touches a little bit as well, and it crept into one of the answers there. Charlie, with regards minimum land amount, and obviously to be eligible for BPS under the 22-23 scheme, you need to be claiming at least 5 hectares. There is a ruck of questions in here, and welcome to all those people that put them in, both pre and that have come in live. Is that 5 hectare limit, is that going to go down, do you think? Because there are presumably people who have small fields next to their house that they want to claim on, or it could be that they're new entrants and they're trying to get on the farming ladder, which is probably more relevant, I think, than someone just claiming for the pony paddock.
Yeah, no, thanks. I think you've put your finger on something there. On one hand, if you look at the guidance in SFI, it says there's no minimum land area. However, as we know, as it currently stands, yes, you need to be a BPS claimant, and therefore there is by default then a minimum land area, because you had to have that minimum land area to claim for BPS. Moving on and coming back to your question, DEFRA is looking at how it can open the field, if you like, to non-BPS claimants. So that would bring into the field of view new entrants to farming. It could bring into a view the situation which we just had, where perhaps you've got a landowner who wasn't claiming BPS, or it could come in, or it could bring into view some small holdings as well. I think SFI, I think it's fair to say, and I think DEFRA will probably say this as well, it is aimed at, more broadly speaking, commercial farming. That's not to say that,
but you could still be a 3 hectare commercial farmer, particularly if you're trying to start out.
Yeah, exactly right. So as it stands, the only barrier is that sort of requirement as it stands of having been a BPS claimant. DEFRA is working on how that restriction can be removed. So we just have to await how and when that's going to happen.
back to the old farmer test, which was talked about loads and seems to have disappeared again, but it sounds like it might be coming back out of the bookshelf. Cameron, I'm going to throw a question here from Will Cartmel. The loss of BPS has not nearly replaced the BPS for grazing/mown grass. Am I missing something? And he says he's claimed for hedgerows and the unimproved grass payment. Is this something that you're picking up from members? And Jonathan, you mentioned it earlier that historic schemes have always favoured arable, be that putting wild. If you want to put wild bird plots in, you had to go onto arable land, not permanent pasture. Is that an issue, Cameron? Do you think that the offer to the grazed farm or the grazing farmer is less than the arable farmer?
Yeah, I think so. And Charlie already mentioned that we're expecting this picture to improve somewhat next year, and so therefore have heard that feedback. And Jonathan's also said that it is very much skewed towards the arable farmer at the moment. So more options are coming down the track through SFI and Countryside Stewardship, which we haven't really talked about much. Both additions in terms of new options to stewardship, but improvements to existing ones next year. So we're very much expecting that picture to improve. And just picking up on the first part of the question, I guess we shouldn't necessarily expect ELM's payments to replace direct payments in full, because direct payments were kind of very simple in some ways, area-based payments paid across the board, whereas ELMS is paying for lots of different actions, and that money's just being split into so many different pots. We've talked a little bit about animal health and welfare, and we haven't really talked about the farming infrastructure grants or all the other pots that have been sort of spread around. So I guess what it comes down to is sort of picking which ones are right for you. Not necessarily with the expectation that you're going to end up, with more or greater than your BPS pre-cuts in 2020, because I don't think that's going to happen for anyone realistically.
And on the small area thing, is that something? Because you're the average CLA member actually owns a small area of land, and is that something that your members, whilst you have a few very esteemed large members with huge areas of land, the bulk of them are under 50 acres or something, aren't they? Do they moan and gripe that they're not big enough to claim and get involved?
Thanks for helping point out that misconception, I should say. But no, you're right, and I think the bulk of many of the farming members, in particular, will be in the sort of 100 to a few hundred acres kind of spectrum, if you like. That's not to say there's not opportunities for them, because there are lots of different payment options depending on what kind of land type that you farm. And broadly speaking, these are area-based payments, and so on the one hand, you might expect to have a higher volume of income through area-based payments if you've got a much larger farm. But every business is different, and for in some instances, it might make sense for a smaller farm to deliver X, Y, and Z option under SFI versus a much bigger farm. And so those opportunities are very much there for smaller farms as well. And hopefully, as has already been touched upon, this kind of 5 hectare minimum kind of default blocker, we're expecting that to change next year when SFI becomes open to non-BPS recipients.
And that'll be good. And before I get a barrage of complaints from people watching, thinking, why is he talking about small areas and giving it away to non-farmers? This is a farmers webinar. It is. But I think it's really important because of the new entrant stuff. And I think that's where it's a real barrier. If you're setting out with a few sheep and 5 hectares and you can't claim anything, it's not particularly fair. I want to touch on the idea of carbon. There's several questions come in talking about carbon. And we can talk about carbon and carbon schemes and this, that, and the other. Jonathan Armitage, when you're thinking strategically on behalf of your Stratton Parker clientele, be those ones you're managing directly or ones you're advising, where do you see carbon coming into these payment schemes? Is it something you stand alone and say, look, we're going to do these schemes, do this, this, and this, and then if we can gain a bit on carbon here by planting some trees or tracking our soil indices, we'll do that as well? How does it interrelate with these schemes?
Well, Charles mentioned earlier actually that it's a jigsaw, all of this, and it's a 3D jigsaw as well, just to make it more complicated. But there's nothing particularly or specifically within the stewardship SFI ELMS schemes that is directly referenced to carbon, although lots of the activities within those schemes have carbon sequestration or carbon emissions reductions benefits to them. So you have to look at those as standalone income streams, and then separately look at your carbon, and I'm going to call them opportunities at the moment, but the carbon situation on the farm. And yeah, you're right, Hugh, we could talk about carbon for hours and hours if we liked. Farming clearly has an issue. If we looked at it at a high level, clearly has an issue to reduce its carbon emissions generally. But once we get to the point where farmers have been able to do that, then they have an opportunity to maybe take advantage of some of the carbon they're sequestering for the benefit of other people as well, and to take a small income stream as a consequence of that. Although I would say that we are seeing now in those whole sort of natural capital markets, sorry to go off at a slight tangent, Hugh, but we're seeing that habitats and biodiversity are starting to become as popular, as important, and overtaking some of the conversations around those income streams than carbon.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Is it? I mean, Georgina, are your clients, when you're on farm, are they talking about carbon and optimizing carbon value, or are they just too busy working out their own carbon footprint and covering their own emissions?
No, I think there are definitely customers who are on that spectrum and are definitely already delivering carbon services through their farm businesses. So, and there's a range, as there always is, Hugh. I don't think you can ever look over the hedge and think, I should be doing what next door's doing, because actually you need to be planning for your farm and what fits with you. And everything in the carbon world, with agriculture, is still really in development at the moment. So I've been edging on a cautious side, really, in terms of encouraging the majority of my customers down that route until things are slightly more developed and established. But there's no reason why, as Jonathan said, we should separate the two, really, as far as we can. Obviously, there needs to be considerations between how the two interact, but we shouldn't really let future decisions impact too far in terms of what we do right now with the SFI. The SFI is a 3-year scheme. We know that we can deliver short-term environmental benefits on farm that will bring in a bit of extra revenue to the farm. So I think there's a great opportunity there. But yeah, absolutely, there's a real mixture, and I think there will be a slow uptake of it. But people shouldn't feel pressured into doing something just because it's a buzzword and it's popular. I think you've just got to make sure the tail's not wagging the dog, and you're happy and comfortable with what you're doing, because that's the key to success.
Yeah, the carbon tail isn't wagging the farmer dog. The key thing on the coal carbon thing, though, just to cut that off now, because we could talk about carbon all night, but there is it's a consideration with these schemes, is knowing what your own emissions are from day one, because if you don't know that, then you could be selling stuff that you need. And the good thing is that does tie into how efficiently you're farming in most cases. So it's not to be scoffed at. Here's a really techie question, but it's actually, I think it characterizes some of the crossovers, and it's from Jess Mallings, who's at Bidwells. Thank you, Jess, for texting. It's a very long question, but basically what she's saying is that they're doing SFI applications for a whole load of their clients who want to do the IPM4 option, which is no use of insecticides. I think that's 45 quid a hectare off the top of my head, which is pretty major deal here if you've got a big chunk of arable. But she said the problem is where you've got grassland margins, SW1 grass margins on an existing stewardship scheme on that farm, computer says no. Charlie Chandler, are these things going to be sorted out? Of these aspiring, ecologically aware farmers going to have to wait till the CS falls off a cliff and then they can make the computer pay them the money?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's a really good question. And well, what can I say? DEFRA are looking at it. They are aware of that problem. And what it comes down to, it comes back to back to land use codes. Here we go again. Essentially, because that parcel has got a countryside stewardship buffer around it, then the system can't distinguish between what is a buffer strip and what is your crops area, unless you map out the buffer strip, which is the other way to go on that one. But I mean, that's a very, very time-consuming job.
But nevertheless, it could be worth it if you've got 1,500 or a couple of thousand acres of arable, and you're going to put the whole lot into the floor option. You map them off separately.
Yeah, and of course, I think the other thing to say is that when you start thinking about the IPM4 action, which is no use of insecticides, what do you need to make that action work? And what you need is other habitat, either around your field or through your field, to give to provide living space, if you like, for your beneficial insects, for your crop pest predators. And that's where your buffer strips come in, of course, isn't it? So either on the outside of the field or as I say, infield. So you can see a contradiction there, can't you? And I think there's been some similar questions that we've had in this webinar, and I've heard elsewhere too. And DEFRA are looking at it. I think what they probably want to work towards is to say that perhaps you will agree a rotational area of land that you will apply that action on, and then you will claim explain each year where you've used that action. It doesn't want to pay you for not applying insecticides on your buffer strips because you shouldn't be already. I guess that because technically speaking, that would then be double funding. But equally, that does stand in the way of knitting together a holistic approach to integrated pest management, which does, of course, include other habitats. So, Hugh, I think the best thing we can probably do is wait. And from the question and answers I've seen from DEFRA recently, is that they are working on that as a priority. It has been spotted because I think this question has been asked many, many times.
Yeah, it is. It is something that's, and it's not just that interrelation. There are various other interrelations, as you'll find out when you choose to log on to your SFI application, and you'll start clicking away, and you'll get a few red lines. Just got to mention quickly, Mark Thomas from the Farming Community Network (FCN) says, "Not all farmers can afford a consultant." Absolutely true. It's worth mentioning the FFRF scheme, which is the Food and Farming Resilience Fund. Is it not, Jonathan Armitage? You're Strutt's doing visits for the Food and Farming Resilience Fund? This is a free consultation visit for farmers, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, we're not. Is the simple answer to that? But there are plenty of people that are, and yeah, I think for those people, it's can be really really important actually. So.
So if you're sat on this call confused and thinking, well, I'm not going to pay a consultant to come along and tell me what to do, you can apply for one of these free. Charlie, it's a half day. I think it's a half day. Come and review the farm, don't they? Spend half a day with you, going over through stuff and through this myriad of different funding streams.
Absolutely, and it's a funding stream that's been deliberately set up by DEFRA to help farmers plan their way through transition, and it can cover a whole variety of topics. All the way from discussing opportunities for schemes like this, like SFI, but it even can help you pick your way through elements like succession, and maybe just really trying to get getting a stock check of where your business is at, so you can run all kinds of reports for your farm. So DEFRA has got a number of specialists, contractors on its books. You will apply to the fund, and then someone will contact you, and you can then explain to them what advice you need. I think the other thing to say is there are other sources of advice as well. I think it's worth emphasising. Natural England itself has farm advisors, and catch and sensitive farming is part of that. So you can always approach Natural England for help. And in addition, I think quite a lot of the learning comes through practical application, doesn't it? And that's probably where speaking to your farming neighbours and friends helps a lot. I'm part of a local farm cluster group, and it's really vibrant. And what I get from that is really invaluable, because I get the real practical kind of hints and tips and other people's experiences. Yes, it isn't direct advice, but it is kind of real advice, if you see what I'm saying.
Exactly.
So don't
How easy
underestimate
how easy to control all those post-sowing weeds in herbal lays where you've got a whole mixture of stuff and you can't use selective herbicides. Wonderful questions like that can be answered. Just worth pointing out, George Hoyes tells me off. It's the Future Farm Resilience Fund. George works for Ceres Rural, and they are doing visits. So if you go on the thing, and actually to cover off a whole load of other questions, there are so many questions coming in, lots of them specific to payment rates and stuff like that. Teo Radford asks about the animal health and welfare claims. Teo, it's all on the .gov website. If you look on there, if you Google it, it will come up. It's about 500 quid a visit, and it tells you exactly how you do it, and it's clicked. To be fair, it is all on there. And if you want all the stewardship rates, several people have asked about stewardship rates. There is a compendium of stewardship rates. Am I right in saying, Charlie, that you look up the 2023 Countryside Stewardship rates, and there's a whole there's even an options finder, isn't there, where you can type in and it gives you the prescription and the money.
There is, yeah. Although the caveat is that Countryside Stewardship 2023 is now closed for applications. That's across higher tier and mid tier. Although the capital grants are still open for applications. So if you're interested in Countryside Stewardship capital grants, going forward, as I say, we don't know yet what the payment rates look like for 2024. Although I think, as has been touched, they are being reviewed, and in particular, there's been a focus on grassland.
Graham Shepherd has literally just sent a message. He's up in Lancashire, lowland beef and sheep. He's saying, from what you're saying, we're best to wait and see what new options come out before we jump into SFI. Cameron Hughes, as well as Charlie's talked about an improved offer for grazing farmers, for grassland farmers, hopefully improved offer for upland farmers as well. What else what is on the CLA wish list for improved SFI options that will appear?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's already been touched on before, but the current moorland, there's basically one option for moorland, which is pretty uninspiring. That's being added to later this year, so that'll definitely improve the picture. I guess one thing we were quite eager to get, we did eventually get it, was the accelerated payments for SFI. So the idea being that if you went in before the end of this year, you'd get your money within the first month rather than having to wait 3 months. I think just maybe coming back on the sort of the thrust of the question, one of the appealing things about the SFI is the ability to add new actions into the agreement without having to wait the full 3 years for the initial agreement term to expire. And so, whilst it might be tempting to sit back and wait and see what comes along next year, I guess not all businesses feel like they're in a position to do that, particularly those that have had another reduced BPS payment come through a week or so ago, and they're starting to feel the pinch. And so, I guess one of the plus points of the SFI is that you can build your application without having to wait. So that's something to bear in mind.
Jonathan, you would say, I mean, presumably these are 3-year deals, aren't they? So if you've got the right land and you found the right rate you want and you can marry the two together and you're not going to duplicate them, then would you say to people to crack on? I mean, I suppose the worst case scenario is an amazing offer comes out next month and they've just put all their grassland into it, then they might be kicking themselves a bit. I don't know.
Yeah, there's always that danger, and I think people have always been nervous about that. I mean, I've been doing this job for 30-something years, and I think in every one of those years, I've had the comment that I don't quite have enough information to be able to make a decision yet. And at some stage, you've just got to get on with your business and make some decisions and move forwards and do the best that you can with what's available today. As Cameron said, with the SFI, there is at least the opportunity to bolt on bits as they come available in later years and later schemes. You can't take things away during the scheme, and that's quite an important point to note as well.
Yeah, so if you can't
reduce your scheme.
Yeah, so if I commit to 20 hectares of SAM3, I'm locked in rotationally for that for 3 years, and I can't take that off.
Yeah, but you can move up the ladder. Yeah.
And also, and I'll throw this out there, I don't know who wants to answer, because I've looked at the insecticide one. And if I go in, and again, the prescription, when you read it, I don't know, it's vague, and you could argue that's a good thing because it's open to interpretation. But if I sign up for the insecticide free option on my arable ground, and in year 2 I have some horrendous issue goes on, and I have to use an insecticide because my crop will disappear, do I not claim it for that year? Do I notify DEFRA? How does it work, Charlie? Oh, come on, Cameron's got his hand up first.
Okay, I don't know who you want to go with, Hugh, but well, in that case, I think first and foremost, as a general rule, with any of the rotational options, you will agree to a certain amount, and what the scheme guidance says in SFI is you need to deliver at least 50% of that in each year. Obviously, you'll aim to deliver the whole amount, but if you can't, then you need to let the RPA know about that. With the IPM4 action specifically, I think first and foremost, I think it's always good just to think about your rotation, if you like, because there may be some crops which are easier to fit with no insecticides than others, for example. And it comes down to your attitude to risk, of course, in those crops. And obviously good discussion with your agronomist, I would suggest. So always think about your rotation, and you might want to leave space in your rotation, or if you like, build some wiggle room in terms of the total amount you commit to, so you could perhaps apply insecticides to maybe more vulnerable crops. I think the other thing to say is, with the IPM4 action, there is the nuclear button, which is that if you really can't do it, then let the RPA know as soon as possible. And I think, once again, that is another kind of general message about all of the new schemes. Keep in contact with the Rural Payments Agency. You might not have an advisor to work through directly, but if something is going wrong, it's better to come up front, let them know than not, because there is an approach that they do want to try and be more reasonable and flexible in such circumstances.
And in doing that, you're better off to, I mean, Jonathan, presumably if you're doing that on behalf of clients, if you don't want to be the 9th caller on the line, you put an email through, so it's logged it in time and history that you have notified them, and it covers you a bit should there be any silliness.
Yeah, absolutely. I think keep a trail of your communications with the RPA at all times. That's the one thing. And I think and we all complain about the performance of the RPA and the delays in responding and so on and so forth. But I think if we do the things that we're in control of, and our clients do the things they're in control of, and you report the things when you're supposed to report them, and you communicate as you're supposed to communicate, then it goes a long way to protecting you and your business. I think my experience is that it might take sometimes a long time to resolve those things, but they tend to get resolved in the right process eventually, provided you've got that trail.
Yeah, absolutely. It's keeping cover of that. Cameron, just with a UK-wide perspective, just briefly fill us in what's happening, because this must have been really frustrating for anyone listening in Scotland or Wales or Northern Ireland. Firstly, Wales have got a gap to their Glass Steer programme, haven't they, which is helpful, some would say, from the Welsh administration.
Yes, that's right. A bit of funding difficulties in Wales. The theory is that their sort of ring-fence budgets, 480 odd million a year, and this year there's basically run into funding difficulties where, as you said, the Glass Steer, their kind of agri-environment equivalent, for those that don't know, is coming to an end. And there's a replacement scheme called the Habitat Wales scheme, which is supposed to run for just 1 year. And there's some doubts as to whether or not that's actually going to be funded to sort of match the Glass Steer levels of funding. So, yes, I suppose we're slightly fortunate in England in that we've got the money. We just need to make sure that we spend it. Whereas Wales, there's a bit more uncertainty as to whether or not they're going to have the funding available. They're having a sustainable farming scheme consultation that's due out quite soon, which is supposed to be their sort of equivalent, if you like, to the sustainable farming incentives. It'll be interesting to see how that matches up. There's been some controversy around a 10%, per holding tree planting target, which I'm sure has made the headlines. So yeah, interesting in Wales, and then Scotland.
And in Scotland, equally as vague at the moment in terms of what the roadmap that they keep republishing in Scotland just keeps getting republished, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think in terms of like transitioning away from direct payments, England's the furthest ahead in the home nations. Wales sort of starting to think about it. But they got direct payments up until 2025 anyway. Then Scotland, I'm not sure whether they're particularly willing to sort of deviate from kind of what the EU's doing, basically, as far as common agricultural policy goes. And so, what their kind of transition ELMS equivalent might look like, I don't know. It doesn't even seem to be clear whether or not they'd like to fund it.
So on that basis, English farmers tuned in tonight, count yourself lucky that you have the veritable array of stuff, even though you feel it may not be as good as BPS. It's certainly better than people have got across the border. Will Armstrong from Carter Jonas sent a question in saying, basically what he's saying is, how would you see the SFI application system working in current years? Because currently it sits on the BPS database, doesn't it? And it sort of tangles across to that. Charlie, is this going to be, I mean, when the whole D-Link thing we've got into D-Link payments, is that going to make life easier, or are we still going to have these hang-ups and these throwbacks, and particularly talking about land cover and land use and all that sort of stuff? How do you see it developing?
Yeah, I think, well, there will always be land use and land cover checks, because that comes down to whether the action or option that you're applying for under these schemes matches the land use and land cover. So I think that's always going to be there. I think we can expect that. But having said that, in terms of this fixed point in time about BPS, I think that will change. So as we know, as we discussed this evening, at the moment there is restrictions according to BPS claimants essentially, but DEFRA wants to open that gate, so there will be a shift, I think, and it won't any longer rely on that BPS the data set, if you like.
Yeah, certainly, Maeve. I mean, in theory, do you think that'll make life easier, Jonathan, once it becomes delinked from BPS and there's less of the historic hangover?
Yeah, I think it'll give them a bit more flexibility about how they manage the system. We've complained about the RPA in their system for many, many years, and just at the point they got it really running quite nicely,
they stopped.
The scheme was abandoned. So, which is a shame. But no, I think some of the fundamentals are in place that will allow them to move forward with this, the mappings and so on, and they're just about to introduce a system to allow people to make changes to maps online rather than have to completely submit bits of paper the whole time. So those things will get easier and better. And I think the fundamental platform, I mean, God willing, the fundamental platform will remain as unchanged as possible, frankly, given all the challenges of introducing new IT schemes.
It's certainly not easy at all. And I suppose, yeah, we can just hope that the mapping thing happens. So just to encapsulate everything in terms of SFI options going forward, Charlie, you reckon we're going to get the next tranche is going to be in the very near future? And
That's correct, yeah.
And then you think that will be it for 2024, and then presumably there will be a further tranche in 25, or do you think we could get another wave in next year?
There will be a time, I'm sure, where we get the whole picture and it's fixed. But I think what we've got at the moment.
When is that? Do you think?
Well, that's I don't think I could say, and it's very hard to speculate.
But when you talk to but you work for .gov, you work for the catchment sensitive lot through Natural England, and when you guys are in a cabal of civil servants, effectively. Do you envisage in your head, like we get told as farmers, 2027, that's when ELMS will kick in, or whatever it's going to be called? It's probably going to be called something different. Do you still envisage that the complete set of options is going to be on the table by 27, or do you think realistically it could be sooner, or could it be longer?
I mean, DEFRA's intention is at some stage there will be the complete set. We will have the whole picture. What we've got at the moment is in some ways quite deliberate. DEFRA wants to test and learn with farmers these new schemes, actions potentially, and so that's why we're getting this gradual rollout. And it also has to pick through some of the kind of intricacies that we've discussed today. We are going to get a whole range of new actions coming out next year, both in SFI and also in Countryside Stewardship. There may be more beyond that, but I think we're beginning to see the whole picture. But I would expect at least for the next 2 years, we will still see changes as well. I go back to sort of my opening point, which I feel that it is worth not delaying on these schemes. Do make use of them as you can now, with the understanding that you can always build. And DEFRA has also sort of explained that you are able to build on existing schemes with new actions, etc., as they're introduced. So that is the reason not to hold back, provided you're feeling confident about what you're applying for.
Yeah, you're not going to theoretically shoot yourself in the foot. You'll be able to add as you go along. Just one final point, which came through from Paul William Moses, who says, as a Scot, yes, we are frustrated, and then a lot of exclamation marks. So yeah, English land managers and farmers, count yourself lucky, and you'll start throwing rocks at the computer now as I say that, thinking, you haven't had to sit on the phone to the RPA. Well, I have actually. Find email, and they're always very helpful when you finally get through those. So credit to them for that. Our hour and 15 minutes has come to an end, and thank you very much for tuning in. I would like to thank our esteemed panel, Jonathan Armitage, Charlie Chandler, Cameron Hughes, and Georgina Wallace, for joining us on this Farmers Weekly Transition webinar, talking about making sense of the Environmental Land Management Scheme, or Environmental Land Management Scheme, ELM. Don't forget, this will be available as a podcast in the coming weeks. It'll be topped and tailed, and you'll be able to download it from the Farmers Weekly podcast channel. You'll find it on there, and you can spool back and listen to any bits which you may have thought you missed out on and didn't take notes of in time. Or if you're unable to join because your internet was a bit rubbish, then that might be helpful as well. But look, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you once again to our panel for joining us tonight. Thank you for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday evening, and have a wonderful Christmas and a happy New Year. Thank you very much, and good evening.